This is an oral history interview conducted for the Witness to War Serving a Nation project in Nauset Regional High School on Cape Cod, Massachusetts. For the sake of this interview, please state your full name and community in which you now reside.
My name is Marvin A. Stout, Jr., and I live in Harwich, Massachusetts.
Okay. So, how did you end up on Cape Cod?
When I came back from the military, which was in 1969, I went to college at Georgia Southern, and there I met my future wife, and her family was from Cape Cod, and my family was living out in California. And when we decided to get teaching jobs, we came up here, and I applied for a job in the town of Harwich, and I got it.
Okay. So how long have you been living here on the Cape?
Since 1975.
Okay. So were you drafted to the war, or did you enlist?
I enlisted because they were getting ready to draft me. As a matter of fact, when I was in basic training, I received a notice that I was being drafted, but I was already in the Army. But my father was military, and my father was a retired enlisted man in the Air Force, a senior master sergeant. And my family has always served in the military. So going into the military was no like, oh, you're going into the military. If there hadn't been a war, it might even have been assumed that that was a natural path for me to take anyway. So when it came up that I was going to school and all, but that I was going to be kind of drafted, I thought the thing to do was to enlist. And I chose the Army because it was a 3-year program. My father said he thought there was a lot more opportunity in the Army. So I joined the Army, and I went to Army Military Intelligence School.
Okay. So they were supportive?
They were very supportive, but at that time everybody had to be. It's different today. At that time, just about everybody had to go in. Remember, when I went in, we had 500,000 American soldiers in Vietnam. 500,000. And that meant every family in this country was affected. Everybody knew somebody who was in the military. And Congress, most of the congressmen had served in the military. It was a whole different thing.
What were your thoughts on the war before you enlisted?
My thoughts on the war were basically curiosity. I can remember I didn't want to go, in a way, who wants to go to war, you know? On the other hand, when I remember standing in formation, and this was at the end of both my basic combat training and my training in at the Military Intelligence School. And now they're reading us our orders. And we don't know where we're going. We know where a lot of us are going, but we didn't know who was going. And we were waiting for them to read that off to us. And I remember I had my fingers crossed. And I had my fingers crossed because I thought, you know, this is my generation's war. And I don't want to say that I didn't go, that I didn't do my share. I want to, if for no other reason, I want to go see what it's like for myself.
How old were you when you joined the military?
I was 19.
Okay. Can you describe for us what it first felt like when you arrived in Vietnam?
When I first arrived in Vietnam, I remember it was kind of a crazy thing because we had flown. I think it must have been about 18 hours or 19 hours by air over there. And when we got off the plane, we were in a, they put us right on a bus, and they took us right out to this big training area, and we were just dazzled. It was hot. It was, and they of course fed us, and then I remember they made us. Then they gave us a place to sleep, and immediately we were assigned guard duty, and there we were, given a rifle, and we had to go guard, and that was it was like we had all these procedures that we had to follow, and there was, in a way, it was more of a training exercise than a real official guard duty. I really began to understand what guard duty was like much later. In this case, they were so afraid that we were so new and didn't know what we were doing. We had a bullet, almost like Barney Fife, that they made us put in our pocket, and if we needed it, we were to take it out and load the rifle. But we had to take it very seriously, and we did take it very seriously. They were afraid we were going to take it so seriously that we would shoot one of our own because we didn't know what was going on.
Where did you serve in Vietnam, and what was that like?
I served with the 9th Infantry Division in the Mekong Delta. Now that would be the southern part of South Vietnam. It's what they call the rice bowl of the world, just about. That's all the rice is raised right there, and the country is fed from there. And North Vietnam wanted rice because they had a population and they couldn't feed them. South Vietnam had the rice, and there were a lot of other parameters for that war, but that was one of the things. The North wanted the South, and they wanted the rice from the South. So the Mekong River goes through there, and we put up our base camp down there in Tan An, South Vietnam, and we were not right on the river, but we did have forward field bases on the river, and we also had a riverine element. So the swift boats, I'm sure that you heard from John Kerry and all of that. We had swift boats, and we traveled up and down the river on these boats, and I was only on swift boats a couple of times, and I have to say that I was in terror the whole time I was on them, because when you're traveling down the Mekong River, which is a big river, it's like the Mississippi River, but there's jungle on both sides, and they're over there in the jungle, and they can shoot at you, and if they shoot at you, you're going to shoot at them, and they're really raising a lot of risk to shoot, because if they do, we will hit them with everything, and it won't be good. But nevertheless, at any time they could shoot you or fire a rocket at the swift boat, and it was scary.
Okay. What was your rank?
When I arrived in country, the first day in country, I was promoted from a private E2 to a private E3, private first class, and that's because they passed a law in Congress that said when you go to Vietnam, the first day that you're there, if you're not a private first class, you are that day. And so that day I became a private. And while I was there, I earned the rank up the rank to sergeant.
How long did you serve for?
I served for 37 months in the military. I was in Vietnam for 18 months. I came home for 30 days after serving 1 year. When you extended for 6 months, then they allowed you to come home for a 30-day leave, and so I did. And while I was home, I witnessed Bobby Kennedy being killed in on TV. So that was the time frame for that.
What is the first thing that comes to mind when you hear the word Vietnam?
Oh, wow. Such a beautiful country. Such a, and yet a lot of tension. It was, I think back on it and I think about how much I grew up just being there. And so, but I think about the South China Sea was some of the most beautiful beaches in the world. But then also, like, the cities were, I mean, they're Asian cities, there's a lot of squalor. The people were always nice. I mean, I guess sometimes they took out guns and shot at you when you weren't looking, but the people were always nice. And getting to know the Vietnamese people was something that I did, because they had another part of what I did was we had. I was in military intelligence, as I mentioned to you, and one of the things that we did, we operated through what they called S5, which was civil affairs, and we built schools and we provided medical attention to the villages. And so we, in our S5 unit, we planned 2 med stops each day, one in the morning and one in the afternoon in different villages all around our base camp. And so we would drive out there and we would give away soap and we would give them shots, and we would have a corpsman examine and take care of these people. And while they were doing all of that stuff, then I would take the interpreter and we would go talk to people and we would try to find out information. And some of the information, as I said to you before, we were always looking for was prisoners of war, American prisoners of war. Did anybody know about any of them? Anything they knew. A couple of times we found out a little bit of information. An American soldier was seen passing through this village, and we pinpointed kind of pretty much the date and the direction they were going, and maybe were able to identify who he was. But that was kind of what we were doing.
Did you ever rescue an American soldier?
No, never anything like that.
Could you describe for us a typical day in Vietnam?
Oh, it was for me. It was there were basically 2 kinds of days. If I was in the base camp, which I showed you some photographs of, with the sandbags and the hooches and the all of that, we would like get up, and you could go to breakfast as early as 6. It was over with by 7, and then report to work. And we had an office, and we would go and we would work in the office, and we would get all this information that was provided to us, and we would go through it and record it. And when we found actionable intelligence, then we would report that to the commanders in briefings, and then missions would be planned out of that. But working in the base camp got to be, in a way, kind of boring, and so sometimes I had a lieutenant that I worked with very closely, and he would say, "Come on, let's go to the field." And so we would either take a Jeep or jump on a helicopter, and we would go stay in the field. We'd go out to these fire bases. And then that's where we would be, actually the soldiers would be going out and engaging the enemy. And we would, most of the time when I was involved in that, I was not involved in like going and hunting in the jungle or through the rice paddies, I would be following up a military operation, and we would be passing out the leaflets and stuff that I showed you, because we were involved in the propaganda campaign, and we were trying to get them to give up. We always said we were the mission was to win the hearts and minds of the people. We didn't do it very well, but we were not very successful at it. But so that's kind of, and then we would go back, and we would then we would be sleeping on the ground. We would be sitting on a perimeter all night long, watching, waiting, pulling guard duty. Sometimes we'd have to go out, and we had what we called a listening post, where we would go out and we would sit and we would listen, and it would just be to protect the camp, so that in case nobody could sneak up on the camp, that kind of a thing. Usually when we did that, we would take a dog with us, a well-trained dog. And I'll tell you, the dogs, you could just look at the dog. You didn't need to look out. The dog knew everything that was going on, and if the ear perked up and he pointed, you knew where to look. And anyway, when I was involved in those kinds of things, I always wanted to go with a dog.
What inspired you to fight each day that you fought?
We believed in what we were doing. We were, after I came back, I'm sure, we've all reviewed everything, but we believed in what we were doing. We thought what we were trying to do was defeat communism. And we were all raised in those days to fear the communists and to fear Russia and the Chinese and all of that. And they were considered to be our enemy as we were growing up, and so we felt like it was our job to keep them from taking over Southeast Asia. And it sounds crazy when I think back of it, that we were motivated out of that sentiment. But that's what we were taught to believe, and we did.
What was your proudest moment while serving, and why?
I think one of the things that we were involved with was in the civil affairs side. We built schools and we built dispensaries, and we collected stuff to get for the kids. And I was always having people send me boxes of stuff from home, and we'd just take stuff out and give it to kids, because GIs love kids, and it was kind of sad that so many of the kids, by the time that while I was there, the most common phrase that a Vietnamese kid would say was, "Hey GI, cigarette?" They wanted a cigarette. We all carried them, and they sometimes would smoke them. I think most of the time they took them to give to somebody else. But I have to say, I'm sure there were a lot of kids that learned to smoke from, which today in New England is certainly not an acceptable thing. Smoking was much more widespread at that time, and they were with our. This will be shocking to you, but when we were given our rations every day, there would be our canned goods, and it would have peaches, and we'd have spaghetti that we would heat up in cans, and there'd be a stick of gum and 5 cigarettes. And that would be a standard everyday thing. And
wow.
Oh, the question. So we would go out and we would do these things, and when we were out meeting with the people, we would discover these kids with cleft palates. Their whole mouth would be all destroyed from a birth defect. And we had a special arrangement with the hospital, in the military hospital in Saigon, And whenever we found one of these kids, we would make arrangements. We'd meet with the parents, and then we would arrange for them to go with us, and we would drive them in our Jeeps to Saigon and take them to surgery and get the pallets repaired. And if I think about anything that we did that was really good for the Vietnamese people, I bet you while I was there were probably 10 or 12 kids that we found out there, and we took up and we got their mouths fixed, and I don't know, to me that was a big deal.
What was your darkest memory while serving, and why?
I think probably the darkest memory was the Tet Offensive, and I remember the day before the Tet Offensive, we were in our office, and there was a knock on the back door, and this informant that we had, this guy who was an agent, showed up at our back door. Now, you're not supposed to be able to show up at our back door. It's a fenced-off government installation. You can't sneak in and knock on our back door, but he did. And we brought him in, and he told us that they were going to come, we were going to be attacked that night. And we reported that information, and sure enough, 2 o'clock in the morning, the Tet Offensive started. And that was the time when attacks took place all over Vietnam. And it was the turnaround point. From that point on, we really never recovered. But what happened to us that night with the rockets that came in and the people that we lost and the place on fire and all of that, I think that was maybe the darkest time for me.
Did you ever take a human life? And if so, could you tell us about that?
You know, I don't know. I always say I didn't, but I don't know. And the reason I say that is because I fired a lot. But I can't say that I absolutely saw somebody fall down from any firing that I was doing. And when you're being attacked and you're just shooting out of a portal, and when you're in a helicopter and you're firing, you're firing. You don't sometimes always know what you're hitting. And so I don't have that feeling of I know I killed somebody and I'm carrying it around. It could have happened. Yeah, I can say this. If it did happen, it was provoked. And I was defending myself, and I know that. So I don't have a bad conscience or anything about that.
What was your happiest moment while serving, and why?
I'll tell you, it's probably the most common thing you would hear from a GI. It was landing in San Francisco, getting off the plane and kissing the ground, knowing that now you're back home and it's behind you, and you got through it. And that was my happiest. I guess you could say I wasn't even in Vietnam then, but that was it.
Can you describe for us your most frustrating experience?
Frustrating experience. I'm sure there were plenty of frustrations. Yeah, a simple frustration, but certainly maybe not the most frustrating, was when I arrived in Vietnam. I drank coffee with cream and sugar. And then pretty soon we couldn't get any cream, so we drank coffee with sugar. And then pretty soon we couldn't get any sugar, so we drank coffee. And so there were times when it was frustrating because we couldn't get things that we needed or that we wanted. But, you know, it was also a time when we were out in these fire bases. We got a new general, and this new general wanted all of us to be happy or happier. And every day at 4 o'clock, he would fly a helicopter in full of ice cream. And they would serve us ice cream right out in the rice paddies. And that was great. Free cigarettes, too.
Were you ever angry at the enemy for something they did?
Yes, and frustrated too, because we had to pull guard duty every other night. You were laying on the ground, and you would be awake for 4 hours and sleep for 2 hours, and then be awake for 4 hours, and that would be the way that the guard duty ran. And we would be frustrated because sometimes we would be guarding the place and we would find out that the Viet Cong would sneak in while we were guarding them and go take things from our motor pool, carburetors and parts of tires and stuff like that. And we didn't even know that they were there. They would just disappear. So that was frustrating because we thought we were keeping everybody out, but sometimes they could come in and out when they wanted to, it seems like.
Did you ever get homesick? And if so, how did you manage that?
You know, you were always homesick, but you were always thinking about home. And when you were really the most homesick was when you didn't get mail. Mail call every day was the happiest time of the day. And they would say, all right, it's mail call time, and then you would go to this area, and then you would wait for them to call out your name, and hopefully there would be a letter. And if there wasn't a letter, then that's when you became even more homesick every day. And I suppose the way that you dealt with it is, now see, we were not, you have to remember, we didn't go to work like at 8 o'clock in the morning and then get off at 5 o'clock at night. We were at work all the time. And so, I mean, it's true that we could go, like I showed you a photograph of the Filipino band playing rock and roll for us. And we could go to the club and get us a beer and stand out there and drink beer and watch the guys and watch the bands play and that kind of thing. We could do that. We even had beer in our office. If we wanted to have a beer, we could have one, because there was no time when you really weren't working. You might go back to your hooch and go to sleep, or if something was going on, you stayed over there and you worked all night long if that's what it took, because we were on all the time.
Did you develop any strong relationships with any of your comrades?
You know, we did, but I really don't know. I do know a couple of guys every now and then that I have very modest contact with, but it wasn't, you know, we talk about the Band of Brothers, and I think that what goes on, and we all supported each other 100%, but we did not have that. I did not have that bonding that I think later developed, and I think that when after Vietnam, and maybe probably for some people in Vietnam, some of that attachment did develop, and it became stronger. More for the people that were not, who were in the military for longer than 3 years. Like these poor guys that go to Afghanistan and to Iraq and that kind of thing, where they're going they're home for a year and they're back over there. They're in a unit with these, and they stay with an intact unit, and they work together as a team for on and on. With us, we would go over there, we'd be in a unit every day. Somebody would leave and somebody new would come in. And we would establish that bond and become very friendly and focus with them for the time that we knew them, and then the next day or whenever their time was up, somebody else would come in and we're doing it all over again.
Did you yourself encounter any near-death experiences?
Well, the night of Tet, I would say yes. A couple of times, I don't know what, when you say a near-death experience, that's kind of, I was not on the verge of dying and or anything like that, but I was in a situation where rockets were coming in and mortars were coming in and we were being shot at, and it was dangerous. And I remember that I was in this bunker one time, and I had gone into this bunker, and I was in charge of the bunker because I was a corporal and everybody else was a private, so that made me in charge. And we were being attacked and firing and all this kind of stuff. The lieutenant came over and he said, "Hey, come on, let's go find out what's going on all over this place." And I said, I said to myself, I am terrified. I do not want to do this. And the lieutenant said, "Come on, let's have some fun." And I said, okay, to myself, there's one thing that he's never going to know, and that's that I am terrified. Let's go. And so we took off and we went all around the perimeter, and we went to where everybody was and checked on them and to make sure that everything was all right and that they had ammunition and all that kind of stuff, and the rockets were coming in and everything, and I guess you could say that was a very dangerous time, but it was okay too.
Did you receive any medals or awards?
I did. I received and I guess this is when you wanted me to hold this up, right? This is what I received while I was in the military, and so there's my rank right down there. There's my rifleman's badge, my rifleman qualification, and up here we have a Bronze Star for service and Army Air Medal for over 25 air missions, combat missions. Huh? Oh, okay. I can't tell what you can see. And then some Army Commendation medals, and then these are the Vietnam service ribbons. And so, yes, I did. And this thing right here was my father. When I got out of the military, my father had this, took my papers, discharge papers, and took the medals that were listed on there and had this whole thing made up for me and gave it to me for my birthday when I was about 35. So I've always kept it because it's nice to have.
How has your service impacted your life today?
Military service is something that changes you, because one of the things I remember the first day that I left, it was the end of basic combat training, and we had 2 hours before the buses were to pick us up and to take us to our assignment. And then at that time, so we went to the club naturally to have a couple of beers, and we were talking. And I remember I was walking out of there, and I said, okay, I don't know where I'm going, and I know that I don't have any control of my life for the next 3 years. It's not up to me. I have to do what they say, and I have to become a part of this. And so you become part of something that's bigger than you are. You really don't have a lot to say about what it is that you do. You do have something, I'm sure that it probably even affects the way that you think. I think you learn that whole experience becomes a maturing effect for you. And so when I came home from Vietnam, I knew right away, okay, I want to go back to college. I want to get a degree. I want to do something to provide service. That I saw stuff I didn't want to see again. I did things I didn't want to do again, and I felt like I wanted to try to do something to make my life and the life of those around me better. And so that's what I did. Or that's why it went through my mind actively, that's what I want to do. And so I came home and went to school and became a teacher.
If a loved one came to you and told you that they were joining the military, how would you feel, and would you have any advice?
Well, today I think that's very hard. I do have family that is in the service, that is in Afghanistan, that's been over there, that's been to Iraq. And not my immediate family, but I have cousins and like nephews and all. Our family has always been involved in that. And, if it was my grandson, I probably would be reluctant because I've been living in New England so long, and I look at the military. It would be. I might not be promoting becoming a professional soldier, whereas it was different because, like I said, with the draft and everything. Do I think? I honestly think that we would probably be doing a lot more. Maybe we would be doing things a lot differently if we had a draft and everybody had to serve their part or do something, even if it was, non-combative or whatever. If everybody had skin in the game, so to speak, then I think our approach to war in this country would be modified.
That's it.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Well, you're very welcome. I hope that was what you wanted.